I've just come back from the Middle East in the last 24 hours, and I've been reminded that a seemingly intractable and violent conflict, particularly the one between the Israelis and the Palestinians, seems to have generated almost to an art form, gallows humor. And I wanted to start with an example of this gallows humor to make an initial point. And it's a story about a priest, a minister, an imam, and a rabbi. It's a joke that first made the rounds about 4 years ago, and it's been recycled again. And it's apparently got a strong shelf life. The story starts with a very intense and edifying evening and a theological discussion about death between a priest, a minister, a rabbi, and an imam. And the rabbi is a little bit anxious because he wants to get down to something more earthy, less academic, and wants his fellow clerics to be able to answer the question what they want to have said about them at their funeral. And the first one to jump in is the priest, and the priest says that, "I hope people will say that I was a fair and honest guide in helping overcome the scandals that exist in the Catholic Church." The minister said, "Well, when I die, I hope people will say that I saved many souls by bringing them closer to Christ." The imam suggested that his death is going to have to be accompanied by a longer speech because his religion is so profoundly misunderstood in America. And he said they'd have to, I hope, say that I was honoring the 5 pillars of my religion, that I actually taught about Islam not as part of a clash of civilizations, but as a religion and as a culture that's stretching out to have a meeting of the minds. He turned then to the rabbi and said, "Well, Rabbi, what would you like to say said about you when you died?" And without missing a beat, the rabbi said, "Look, he's breathing." Now, the truth is that I'm not going to stand here today and talk about we can jilt the Grim Reaper, but certainly the story is, can one teach about the Middle East and even think about resolving some of its core issues in a way that breathes fresh breath into it? As you can see, I've aged, I'm a grandfather, and it's changed my reading habits. And I now read, of course, children's books for Chloe, who's 5, and Bodhi, who's 2. They're very advanced in terms of their passion and their capacity with language. And Dr. Seuss has become one of their favorites. And this, I thought, was an appropriate way of thinking about the Middle East, and particularly the Israeli-Palestinian dimension of the conflict. And as the story says, you all are familiar with the cat in the hat, I hope. And this mess is so big, so deep, and so tall, we cannot pick it up. There is no way at all. But the truth is, what this is a story about is a cat in the hat who is a party maker, a house wrecker, and a cleaner-upper, all in the same time. Sally and her brother are stuck inside in a rainy day, nothing to do, and the cat in the hat comes and entertains them and takes the house apart, and it's littered, and the mother's going to be home any minute. But after he destroys a chunk of the house and the fish is pleading for its life and isn't enjoying this whole episode, it turns out that this guy, the cat in the hat, turns out to be a deus ex machina, the external force that actually not only makes fun and breaks things up, but he makes everything clean. The tragedy is that the man or woman theory of history does not have a cat in the hat. We don't have happy endings there with someone that can come and entertain, be a party animal, and then clean up the mess with a happy ending. Sometimes we hear about Sadat and we hear about Rabin as one of those historical figures that shock people into doing things that they thought were impossible in some healing process. But neither of their lives ended well, and the truth is that they're very problematic when you examine closely. The icon was tainted. So I'm not going to focus on how we try and get to understand the Middle East mess and try and teach it in a new way that gets people more insightful. I'm rather going to focus first on, I think, one of a dozen or so distinguishing characteristics of the new model we've been trying to create here at Queens College. And I do mean we, a team effort with a half a dozen people, many of them with talents and gifts and insights much greater than my own. And if you want to have impact, you have to work in team. And so it's the creating of diversity in creating a learning community. The learning community that we've created has 5 different dimensions to it. First, we've got a group of very diverse students from all different ethnic, racial, national groups, and those students are the centerpiece as undergraduates and part of our learning community. But they're then supplemented by some senior citizens that have unique biographies that add immeasurably to the ideological and generational exchange that takes place in this learning community, sitting in the classroom with people that are 18, 19, 20, 21. For example, we had in this learning community a number of people who came and survived Auschwitz that were sitting in the course. It wasn't some distant memory. People talked quite vividly and passionately about their experience in one of those traumatic moments in history. We also had several Christian women whose fathers served in the SS and were Nazis and were sitting in our class. We also had several Palestinian Arabs who were from places in Israel like Jaffa that they ended up having to leave, and they talked with great passion about this. So we have this incredible storytelling that's taking place by people that are experiencing things that are not from pages in books, but visceral experiences of people that are still alive, coherent, and testifying for history about what they experienced. The third part of the learning community had to do with teachers. We actually brought in teachers from 10 different high schools that were teaching and were mandated to teach about the Middle East, and they were pulling out their hair. How do they teach this without having the parents of their kids that often come from diaspora communities, Israeli mothers and fathers, Palestinian and Muslim mothers and fathers, people that have real connectivity to the Middle East, and the teachers were frightened they would misstep. They would do something that would get them in trouble, perhaps even threaten a career. So we had high school teachers in the class, a class taught in the late afternoon every Tuesday for 3 hours, and then 6 times in the semester, they stayed for 5 hours together and tried to design curriculum that was age grade relevant for their high school students. The fourth part of our learning community involved high school students, mostly from the adjoining high school here that's right on the edge of our campus. And these were almost all honor high school students, and they represent the same kind of diversity ethnically, religiously, and nationally. And last but not least, the fifth dimension of this learning community were people from the Middle East. We brought in diplomats, negotiators, scholars, grassroots activists, military leaders, a sense of traffic from the Middle East that would visit us in a way that would be helpful as a learning community. The 3 R's, some historical periodization. The class and the structure of trying to make anew and learn the Middle East in a different way is dividing it into looking at conflicts like the Arab-Israeli conflict in a triad. We have roots of the conflict, and they're contested. We have renovations or major moments of historical change, and those are contested. And then we have would-be resolutions, or we could also have the possibility of irresolution. We know in many conflicts in the world, in particular in the Middle East, we have sometimes people, national leaders, and nations themselves that are resolutely irresolved, and there's no resolution. So not every attempt to mediate a conflict and transform it works. In fact, it's littered with a lot of failures. Now, choosing between the bad and the terrible, the nature of dilemmas in the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is so bad that it's been not just a question of bad and worse, or even between bad and terrible. The choices sometimes come down to cholera and the plague. And how do you motivate people where the dilemmas are so profound and the choice is so troubling? How do you energize and mobilize people for something that is hardly a clear good choice over a decisively bad choice? People get de-energized and demobilized when they say, well, there's not a big hooray here, there's sort of an oy vey here. And how do you get people to move and be energized in this kind of environment? I want to face these dilemmas in a very serious way. Palestinians are stuck in this kind of perhaps cholera and plague choice, just as are Israelis. Just to give you a quick example of this, the Israelis have two lobes of their brain that are deeply divided when it comes to imagining their existential plight, the threat they're most concerned about. One threat that's tied to Zionism and the Jewish state is the trade-off and the dilemma of having deep heritage, religious, and ideological ties to the greater land of Israel, Judea and Samaria as it's called biblically, or to the occupied territories as other people would refer to it. And by the way, about a half of all Israelis use the term occupied territories. This choice of wanting the territories, but if you take the territories and annex them, you will find your appetite geographically is undermined the Jewish character of your state, and you'll have a majority of citizens that are not Jewish. A very famous general by the name of Yehoshaphat Harkabi, hardly a household word, once came up with a pithy insight, a sound bite that he suggested was really a sound policy. Unless Israel helps birth a Palestinian state, it shall become the Palestinian state. So this choice in Israel is, gee, we have to get out of territory to not end up undermining the Jewish character of the state of Israel and Jewish demographic majority. But in getting out of these territories, like in Gaza, they discovered curved trajectory weapons, rockets, missiles, and mortars were raining down on them. So do they get out of territories to survive and keep their Jewish state, or do they get out of the territories to preserve the Jewish demography, but then do not have protection? Israel is not, in spite of everything you've heard, controlling the skies with these magical anti-missile systems, the most famous of which is the Iron Dome. The Israelis have a profound dilemma here in making choices. The Palestinians also have profound dilemmas they're conscious, aware of. That is, on one hand, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is told, you are the interlocutor. But we notice you can't speak, and the state you just got is for the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, you think, but you don't control Gaza. So you're not an interlocutor. You're not a negotiating partner that can talk about representing Palestinians in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And therefore, you better think about how you reunite these two territories. And so the Palestinian Authority and the PLO thinks about how to reunite Gaza and the West Bank. They think about reconciling with Hamas. And then the Israeli government and the Americans say, and some Europeans, well, if you reunite with Hamas under the current circumstances, given who their leaders are and what their politics are, you delegitimate yourself in the PLO and the West Bank by getting in bed with terrorists, and you become a terrorist. Palestinians are caught between a rock and a hard place. Profound dilemmas. You also have the dilemma, if you look at the map, and I think it's right side up, the four-state de facto reality. If you look at this map, there's a striking thing that you would see, and if you thought about it for 2 minutes, I've already referred to there being two Palestinian entities, would-be states, one in Hamas, of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and the other under the PLO, the Palestinian Authority dominated by Fatah in the West Bank. There are two Palestinian would-be states. And if you look closely at Israel, you can make a case with some exaggeration. There is the internationally recognized state of Israel within the pre-1967 boundaries, but they also have a beginning of a runaway settler movement in the West Bank that some significant young people, powerful well beyond their numbers, no longer recognize the Jewish state of Israel's authority, either in the Knesset or the Prime Minister. They march to a higher drummer. So if you're for a two-state solution, my point is very simple. You have to face the fact, as Leo DeRocher would say, you've got to go from the four-state de facto reality to the two states you want, a state of Palestine and a state of Israel. This is not just an uphill battle, it's an up-mountain battle. Understand the barriers that stand in the way of your goals, and there's an international consensus now that the goal for nearly a decade has been a two-state solution, yet there are deep, entrenched problems. Very quickly, we have something that happened to me about 7 years ago, taking one of my many missions over to Syria, and I had a very, very wealthy business person who had a lot of money to spend on rugs and was very well informed. And on the way out, with his 9 rugs that are going to be shipped back to America for $40,000 or $50,000, he saw one that caught his eye as he was leaving this rug store in Damascus, and it's truth be told, you see. It says, if you can read fine print, the rug seller in this photo is actually from Dubai, not Damascus. I couldn't not tell you the truth here. But what happened is that as this person is leaving, he loved this other rug out of the corner of his eye, and half of it was showing he bought it. He took it home and he unfolded it, and the gorgeous pattern gave way to a portrait woven into the rug of Hanan Eshrawi, a famous Palestinian spokesperson. Not exactly what he wanted to have on his floor. And don't buy or sell half a rug. The metaphor here, the anecdote here is so much of the thinking about the Middle East has to do with narratives that are half truth and half false, and that passes as if it's serious historiography. It's not. Narratives are what we all end up spewing, and if you're in a diaspora community that's caught in a crisis or a war, what do you end up doing? Feeling compelled to identify with your side and fight the war from the safety of the United States in the media, and make sure that your side is seen as an innocent victim and the other side as a vile perpetrator. We're basically looking at partial realities. The struggle for a new educational system on the Middle East is to see the full rug and understand you have to therefore master the next quick, and I apologize to my Muslim and Jewish friends in the audience that the Grimm fairy tales and the Three Little Piggies, it's not exactly kosher, I understand, but this makes my point. What we do in the class that helps distinguish it from other ways of thinking about the Middle East, not only do you have to see the full rug and understand the other, you also have to build the most compelling house of the other side. Don't straw man. Don't build a house of straw that the big bad wolf can easily blow over. Don't build a house of wood. Build the most compelling case for the pains and claims of the other. So at least you're getting a sense of the other side's woven fabric that's in the rug. And so the students that take our courses are all challenged to understand the other by building the most compelling, not the most repelling case in terms of the other's pains and claims, their goals and their values. And here we have perhaps the most important element that brings together some of the three last slides I talked about. The central requirement of every student in the class after a brief 20-minute survey that is meant to reveal their bias, their community of commitment, which side in the conflict they identify with, and which side in the conflict they know little about and little sympathy for. And at that moment, after the students have revealed what their own community of commitment is, which side they identify with, they have to spend the entire rest of the course engaged in an exercise of mastering the other side. And we have 4 or 5 variations of this walk in the other side's shoes, from first building the best case statement and narrative that you can. A whole course where you spend time studying with people from the other side that come from the Middle East, that give you some sense of the best narrative the other side has, and you write a compelling essay. You're a lawyer for the other side, the most compelling case statement. We also have, thanks to Sophia, who's one of the team, one of the people that I learned from, one of the people that has the skill set and the knowledge base that I'm learning from her about, is someone that's a master of designing and implementing simulations. And there are 2 kinds of simulations that we ourselves, I think, have mastered and constructed a way of learning about the Middle East in a unique way. One is to look back at a decisive historical moment. For example, the roots in the 3 R's of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the root moments would be the 1947 United Nations Special Committee on Palestine that went to the Middle East to figure out how can we somehow do a Solomonic compromise. What do these parties want? And we revisited that, and the students who identified with Israel and Zionism had to play the role of Palestinians and those that were against the founding of the Jewish state. And we had the Jews that had to play the role of the Palestinians and others that were against the Zion. So we had people switching sides and role-playing. The other is an interesting fast-forward, not revisiting a great historical moment, but anticipating a big historical moment, like a real-time negotiation, a secret negotiation in late success just up the road, where we create a framework for a would-be serious breakthrough in negotiations. The students study with real Palestinian, real Israeli, and real American negotiators, study with them for 6 weeks, and then they get cast in a role of playing the other side in this simulation. The next thing is a new wrinkle and adds a whole new dimension to what we're doing in trying to teach the Middle East in a new way and in a model that's replicable. We always brought the Middle East to us by way of scholars, diplomats, negotiators, grassroots organizers, but it wasn't quite authentic enough. It wasn't the smells of the Kasbahs. You didn't get a sense of the landscape. You didn't really get a chance to meet the people in their real environment. So this past summer, for the first time, we managed to bring a group of college students that integrated for the first time a Queens College student into a tour that goes to Saudi Arabia at the beginning and ends in Israel, and then in betweens goes to Abu Dhabi and Dubai of the United Arab Emirates and to Oman. 5 very different places. So we now have a field dimension where our students can go out to the countries themselves. And this coming summer, we're going to do a bigger tour, and you're all invited. A catch: you have to be majoring and have a strong background in the Middle East. We prefer that you also have some speaking capacity in either Arabic or Hebrew. And you have to be committed to work for a year after you've come back with your peers that will be a team and do blogging and work on the campuses. And this will involve a number of campuses around the United States, Queens College being just one of them. So this two-way traffic gives us a whole new way of immersing our students, not in role-playing, not in imagining what it's like in Israel or Palestine or Saudi Arabia or Oman or the United Arab Emirates. They actually go there, and they meet with the who's who of those countries, the leaders, the kings, the princes, the grassroots activists, the people that oppose the government, university students like yourself. Impact, a word about impact. I'll give you 3 quick things in terms of how we measure impact. And this is a trivialization. I'm doing this on one foot, leaving the stage. 3 people to give you a sense of impact and give you a fair range of impact. One student that I'd like to mention is Maha, and she's a Muslim student, very active on campus, graduated. I will not do more in terms of identifying her. And she was very relieved when she didn't have to walk in the Israeli Zionist shoes anymore. And she said, I'm finally out of these. They were too tight, they didn't fit. But along the way, I learned the state of Israel actually is not going away, and it's got some legitimate claims and real security concerns. We have a Jewish student who's now in rabbinical school named Itzhak, who said what he relearned and understood, what he understood was that most Palestinians are not terrorists, they're not violent. He never met a Palestinian in his life until he came to this class and met Palestinian negotiators and sat next to a man who grew up in Jaffa and had to leave Jaffa, who was a Palestinian Muslim. So what happens here is people do not decamp. They don't have a new chip put in their mind where they suddenly change their allegiances and their community of commitment. They don't. What they learn to do, most of the students from this very broad band ideologically and ethnically and religiously, is they learn that there is a deeper complexity. There's a gray area. It's not black and white. And the slogan that they came up with the first year we did this was what they really learned are 2 slogans that they've come to internalize. One is, I now believe my side is right enough to acknowledge the wrongs it has committed in this conflict. And the second soundbite, which represents, I think, a learning curve and impact, is they believe that they have done deeper analysis without political paralysis. Many students who are advocates and deeply tied to one side or the other in this conflict are afraid that if they take this course, they're somehow going to be swung away from, they're going to be decamped. They'll have that new chip in their head, or they will be not political at all. Instead, they have learned deeper complexity and done deeper analysis, and now they're better prepared to be advocates because they know the other side, not as a straw man, but a house of brick. And there are things about the other narrative and the other history of their own family, their own community, that certainly has opened up their eyes. Last but not least is what I have learned, and this is sort of a goofy picture of everyone laughing, and I'm sort of in the middle, and that's meant to suggest you have to build not only a diverse group of students, a diverse group of high school teachers, a diverse group of senior citizens, bring over a broad band, different ideas and sentiment from the Middle East, learn from them. You have to have a team of teachers that can actually be organize this kind of breakthrough. And I have the incredible honor to be partners with people, most of whom are in this hall tonight, and I'd be remiss to not mention Sophia McGee, John Vogelsang, Stephen, Alexandra, who's already spoken to you, and Batya. And Batya is actually in the class co-teaching with me and Sophia. And so what really has to happen here to have a new vision of how you teach is to not think about what is the impossibles in transforming conflicts and doing healing. Because very few things are impossible. And you shouldn't think of it also as inevitable. Peace and conflict mediation is not inevitable. Between the inevitable and the impossible is that narrow space where all of the work needs to be done. What are and who are the contingencies between the impossible and the inevitable that are the path to tomorrow? Thank you.